welcome to the One More Thing podcast. Today I'm with Dr. Larry Baucom. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So it was our we call it our Super Bowl Sunday. Every Sunday is Super Bowl Sunday, but this one had sort of a more epic connotation to it being Easter. You guys look forward to this every year because it's one of the biggest gatherings that we have. And we had the sunrise service, which had just a beautiful sort of glow to it almost. Like you called it like this mystical sort of fog that rolled in. Kind of give us a description for those of us who weren't there.
Well, we have a stage in an area of our property which is called the Grove, and it's heavily wooded but cleaned out to where there's a big area of grass in the middle and a big stage and 500 chairs and 10 picnic tables and tents for coffee and tents for some of the communion elements. We get out there. When we get there, it is dark.
Yep.
And they open the stage up and turn the lights on. Everything kind of comes alive. And then there's about 20 people wiping down all the dew from the chairs.
That was right.
And as soon as you get it wiped off, it comes back. So it's kind of one of those things. We try to keep the seats as dry as possible, but we still give people a paper towel when they get here and a communion element. So it's one of those things, you get to dry your seat before you sit down.
Yeah.
If you don't, you'll regret it.
And each service, because we had our typical 9 and 10:30, but there was something really special about that sunrise service, and there always is. And you being a pastor 40 years, what is it about these Easter sunrise services that have that sort of something? You don't have the lights and the production like we have. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what is it about sunrise service and Easter that just resonates with people?
Well, I think it's like having a service anytime you have something outside.
Oh yeah.
And when you go back to the gospel passage, while it was still dark, Mary went to the garden. She went to where the tomb in the garden, and where we are in the Grove is very garden-esque. It's very shaded, outdoor, very all natural, and the songs are sung more simply without a lot of as much amplification.
Yep.
We don't have the full drum set and all the guitars and everything, but it's more of a simplified thing. But we try to keep it that way. It's intentional, and there's hundreds of people that show up, and they love it every year. But we just think it's one of the special times.
Yeah, we almost had 400 people at that sunrise service alone.
Yeah,
and I noticed a few people actually came back for the 9 or 10:30 service, which is always awesome. But I wanted to touch base, since it's one more thing. Suncoast, I hate to use the word prides itself, but we have a distinctive sort of theology here. And I think you did a masterful job on Sunday of elaborating the difference between the traditional view of how we come to see this moment of the resurrection as being something, for me, being way more profound than the typical evangelical side of like the sacrificing of God's Son to satisfy. Can you give us like a real brief history lesson as to how that theology emerged, that somehow like God had to somehow kill his son, essentially was suicidal in a particular way, and what Suncoast, where we stand on that particular issue?
Yeah, the substitutionary view of atonement, which means that Christ died on the cross as a substitute for me, that God so loved the world, but there's this problem, there's sin, and there's no way that we could get across that gulf of sin. So God, in his love for us, sent his son to die for us so that his blood might sacrifice the justice of God so that we could be in relationship with God. Now, that's the typical substitutionary view of atonement concept, and it's full of problems. It's not really authentic. It's something that the church has constructed, but there are similarities. To say that Jesus was crucified is true. We don't deny that. But to say that, let me put it in more modern language. So God was so pissed off at the world that he killed his own son to make himself feel better so that we could save humanity. So the world is damned, but God kills his own son.
Right.
The contradiction to that is Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, and God said, don't do that. We don't sacrifice kids anymore.
That's right.
But then all of a sudden, we bring this same concept back. It's so much more healthy to say that, was it God's heart that needed to be changed? I think we mentioned this before. That's the concept of propitiation.
Right.
That means that we have to do a sacrifice so God will feel better about himself and no longer condemn the world. Or expiation, which is whose heart was changed, God's or man's. Propitiation, it's God's heart. Expiation, it's the human heart. Jesus was the Son of human. He was the Son of humanity. And he came to show us how we could be better humans.
Yep.
And when you sacrifice yourself and are unwilling to compromise, I will not bow a knee to this imperial system that is destroying humanity. I will stand for love and for truth, and I think that's what Jesus stood for. And that's a simple explanation of
Right.
it. But it happened through history on the East and the West. I mean, in the Western, that's from Rome, the Catholic Church from Rome, when it was started in Rome and worked out toward Europe and even ultimately the United States. Before that, and it was in Constantinople was
Right.
where the head was, and that was called the Eastern Church. So the Eastern Orthodox, which is kind of the Eastern Catholic Church versus Western Catholic. The Western Catholic says one guy died, and because he died, then we all have the possibility of making it to heaven. The Eastern side said Jesus died, but he died representing that several things. One, that death no longer has control over life, and it's not just Jesus who was resurrected, but all of humanity can be resurrected. And on the weekend, you'll notice I told my own resurrection story.
That's right.
And it's, every year, what a great opportunity to say, you can be resurrected again, or you can be transformed again. You can start over again. You can do something new. I mean, and I think that's the power, I think, of the resurrection story. The cycle, death to life, death to life, but life always wins.
That's
always
right.
wins.
And you alluded to the fact, like, prior to Jesus' crucifixion, there was the Last Supper. And the symbolic nature of taking the wine as that nephesh, right? The nephesh, like that's ultimately what the blood represented in the whole crucifixion, death, and resurrection story, was something deeper than blood covering the sin. So now God can't see the sin anymore. He sees the blood.
Right.
Explain that. Like, the nephesh for the Hebrews was the source of life, which is essentially like what
right.
God represents.
We have a tendency, and so did the Greek culture, of breaking human beings into multiple parts. In the Hebrew, it was not that way. There was no separation from the body or the blood or the spirit. They all were one. When God created in Genesis, he took this form from the dust and he put his breath in it and it became life. But the other element was nephesh, which is blood, or the life-giving essence. And they wouldn't drink the blood. But somewhere down the road, we now drink the blood because we think it covers all our sins. But the reality is we do that commemorating the fact that the Spirit of Christ lives in us. And his life essence becomes our life essence. And we love greater. We love deeper. We're kinder. We want to be people that are the more redeemed humanity, the humanity that's transformed into a higher level, which Jesus, I think, was the great example of that. I think that's what God intended all along. It's just, it takes us a long time to catch on. Jesus finally says, hey, I got it. Here it is. And we go, hey, that's great. Kill him.
Yeah.
And they don't want it. And now today we've so changed the original authentic Jesus message towards her. I bet if Jesus were to walk in, I don't know what you guys are talking about. You're out here, you're worshiping me, but you're fussing with everybody else. You're angry everywhere you go.
Yeah.
Let me make a suggestion. Quit worshiping me and follow what I said to do. Love other people. Don't give in to the system. Don't let it run you or rule you, but let something on the inside determine who you are.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a beautiful and eloquent way to understand this hotly debated theological topic.
Right.
And you had a great metaphor. You said at the end of the day, there are all sorts of different theories, theologically, philosophically, about what took place and what is the significance or meaning. But we don't bog ourselves down here at Suncoast about all those things. We just love people as they are, where they are. And you had that metaphor was the idea of,
if people are dying of thirst,
that's right.
Why are we arguing about whether or not we should use straws?
That's it. I thought, I laughed out loud when you said that. And I was like, that's it. Like, this is it. And that's been the heartbeat of this community and why I think people are being drawn to it. And this was a big service even compared to last year when the restrictions of COVID were lifted and even more. As you see us moving forward, because Easter's always a good momentum, we're getting into a new series this week that I think capitalizes and really has like a nice sort of linear flow from what you talked about. You came up with the title "Lean In," and what does that mean for us? Like, what is this series going to sort of entail, and how does it relate to what we talked about this past weekend about us being like not a resurrection people, but resurrected people who walk in that redemptive quality?
I think you're describing it perfectly. I mean, when we are that, we are leaning into something. I use the analogy: if you see a car on the side of the road, you want to help push it off. You lean into the car, and with your strength or weight, you begin to push the car where you want to go. Sometimes people are leaning away from their best self. We want people to lean in to their best self.
Yeah.
When you lean, and I think the analogy is that when I begin to truly lean in, what I discovered is God was already leaning into me. So this will be a lot of fun. We're talking about the lost coin, the lost sheep, the lost son. These are going to be in a few parables. This is going to be a great series and give people a take home. But you know, how can we be a resurrected community without leaning in? We got to lean into our neighborhoods. We got to lean into our families. Because I think that's what we should not lean away from our best self, but always into our best self. And God is at the center of our best self. So we lean into Him, He leans into us, and better things happen.
Yeah. The world changes.
It does.
I'm excited. I'm up this Sunday.
Yes, you are.
To crank us up on this thing, and it's all about Jesus being with the people who are on the margins of society, who were the oppressed of the society, because of the powers that be that attempted to label them. So I'm excited to crank it up and to see how we can lean into, like you said, to our best selves. So
it's going to be a great series. And I look forward to you launching it this week. It's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting, and I'm glad to be a part of this team.
Can't wait.
Me too.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Dr. Baucom.
My pleasure.